The night my brother-in-law broke down my apartment door, I was on my knees trying to stop the bleeding from my forehead with a dish towel. My husband was at work. My sister had sent him. I know that now. I didn't know it then. What I knew was the sound of wood splintering, and then his voice. Low, controlled, the way it always was before things got bad, saying my name like it was something he needed to spit out. And then his hands were on me, and I hit the counter and the world went sideways. The dish towel was already soaked by the time my father-in-law got there. He lived 3 floors up in the same building. He had a key. He let himself in, stood in the doorway of my kitchen, looked at me on the floor, looked at the mess, looked at his son, and he said nothing. He turned around. He went back upstairs. I want you to understand what that silence cost me. Not just that night. For the next 2 years. My name is Rosalind, and I was 27 when I stopped believing that family meant safety. I had married into the Whitmore family 4 years earlier. My husband's name is Kent. We met in grad school. He was finishing an MBA. I was in my 2nd year of nursing school, and we sat next to each other in a coffee shop for 3 consecutive Sundays before he finally said anything. He was kind. He was funny in a quiet way. He called his mother on her birthday without being reminded. I thought that meant something about who he was. His family was old money in the way that doesn't announce itself. They didn't drive flashy cars or wear loud clothes. They just had a way of looking at you that made you aware of what you didn't have. His father, who everyone called Mr. W even inside the house, was a retired circuit court judge. His mother had been a corporate attorney before she stepped back to manage charitable foundations. His sister was a vice president at a financial consulting firm at 31. And then there was Kent's brother, Doyle. Doyle was 35, unmarried, and the kind of person who filled rooms with his own noise. He sold insurance, which should have been innocuous, except that Doyle treated it like a con. He had a way of finding out what people feared and using it. I watched him do it at dinner tables. I watched him do it to Kent. I should have watched more carefully. The problem, and I did not understand this until it was almost too late, was that I was the problem. Not because of anything I had done, because of what I was becoming. I passed my boards on the first attempt. I got a position in the cardiac ICU at a Level I trauma center 30 minutes from our apartment. I worked nights for the first 18 months and then shifted to days when a slot opened, which almost never happened. I started getting recognized at work. My unit manager pulled me aside after a code that had gone wrong in all the right ways, meaning we had somehow kept a 63-year-old man alive when everything in the room said we shouldn't. And she told me she was putting my name forward for a charge nurse consideration. I was 26. Kent was proud of me. He said so, often. What I did not see was how that sat with the rest of them. My mother-in-law had a word she used for women like me. She never said it directly. She said it the way people say things they want you to hear without being able to accuse them of saying it. She would compliment my dedication and then add, gently, that she hoped I wasn't letting ambition crowd out the things that mattered. She asked once, in front of the whole family at Thanksgiving, whether Kent and I were thinking about children yet, and when I said we were focusing on our careers right now, she smiled and said, "Of course you are, sweetheart." Doyle was cruder about it. Behind closed doors, when Kent wasn't in the room, he had a way of making comments that technically said nothing. About how tired I looked. About how nurses were a dime a dozen. About how impressive it must be to work around doctors all day. There was always a way to hear it that wasn't an insult, which meant I could never call it out without sounding thin-skinned. So I didn't. And then I got the recognition award. It was a Regional Nursing Excellence Award. Not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but in our professional world, it meant something. There was a ceremony. I wore the navy dress I'd bought for my cousin's rehearsal dinner. Kent took a photo of me holding the plaque and sent it to his family group chat before I could even ask him not to. His mother sent back a string of heart emojis. His sister sent congratulations with 2 exclamation points, which was about as effusive as she got. Doyle sent nothing. 3 weeks later, he came through my front door with his shoulder. I've tried to piece together the sequence of events the way you do when something doesn't make sense. Backwards from the end result. looking for the moment where a different choice would have changed everything. What I keep coming back to is a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. Kent had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. I wasn't snooping. I was walking past to get water. The call connected on speaker by accident, and I heard Doyle's voice say, "She's getting too big for herself, Kent. You know it. The whole family knows it." And Kent said, "She works hard. That's not a bad thing." And Doyle said, "It's embarrassing. That's what it is." I stood there with my glass of water and I made the decision. The decision I regret more than any other, not to say anything. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself Doyle was just Doyle. I told myself Kent had defended me. I went to bed and said nothing. 15 days later, on a Thursday night in March, I was home alone doing paperwork at the kitchen table when I heard the sound. I thought at first it was a maintenance issue. The building was old. Things broke. Sometimes the pipes made sounds like impact. But then the door was open, and Doyle was standing inside my apartment, and his face was a color I'd never seen on a person's face before. I stood up. I said his name. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. I don't remember the first tick clearly. I remember the counter. I remember the floor. I remember the specific coldness of the linoleum against my cheekbone, and thinking that was a strange thing to notice. I remember his voice, very close to my ear, telling me that I needed to understand something about my place. I remember my own voice. I remember screaming for help, genuinely screaming, the kind you don't plan. I remember the door opening. I remember my father-in-law's face in the doorway, the pause, the assessment, and then the door closing again. The sound of that door closing was louder than anything Doyle had done to me. I called Kent from the bathroom floor with the door locked. He came home. He sat with me in the ER while they stitched the cut above my eye and wrapped my wrist and took the X-ray that confirmed the fracture. He held my hand and he looked devastated. And he said he was sorry. He did not call the police. I asked him to. I said it directly, I want to call the police. He said, "Let me handle it. I'll handle it with the family." I was in pain, and I was frightened, and I trusted him. And so I said, "Okay." That is the decision I live with. That okay. What handling it with the family looked like was a dinner 2 weeks later that I was not invited to. What came out of that dinner, filtered through Kent, presented to me as resolution, was that Doyle had a problem, a stress problem, a pressure problem. He was going through a difficult period professionally. The family agreed he needed to get help, and he had agreed to seek it, and wasn't that the important thing? I sat across from my husband at our kitchen table, the same kitchen, still with a small stain near the baseboard that I couldn't fully clean. And I asked if anyone had asked what I needed. Kent was quiet for a long moment. "They want this to stay in the family," he said. I understood then what I was to them, not family. Something they had acquired and would manage accordingly. What happened next is the part people don't talk about when they tell stories like this, because it doesn't fit the narrative cleanly. I didn't leave, not immediately. I want to be honest about that, because I think the dishonesty in these stories is what makes people feel alone when their own experience doesn't follow the clean arc. I stayed for 7 months. Part of it was practical. We shared finances. I had student loans from nursing school, about $60,000, which sounds like a lot until you know what nursing school costs. And while I was earning a good salary, I wasn't liquid. We had a joint lease. I didn't have family nearby. My parents were in Oregon, and my relationship with them was complicated in ways that made the conversation I'd need to have feel impossible. Part of it was grief. I had believed in this marriage. I had believed in Kent. Some part of me kept waiting for him to choose me, clearly and loudly, in a way that couldn't be misread. He didn't. What he did instead was smaller and slower and worse. He started questioning my account. Not aggressively. Kent was never aggressive. It was gentle, concerned questioning. He wondered if I had provoked Doyle somehow without realizing it. He wondered if the stress of my job was affecting my perception. He suggested twice that maybe I should talk to someone, meaning a therapist, meaning that the problem lived inside me and not inside his brother. I did talk to someone. I saw a therapist named Dr. Alicia Bowman, who had a small practice near the hospital and an unhurried way of listening. She was the first person to use the word gaslighting to me. I had heard the word before. I had thought I knew what it meant. I didn't. Not really. Not until she walked me through my own memories, and I started seeing the shape of it. I started keeping a journal in January. Dates, times, incidents. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way you chart a patient, because that's what I knew how to do. The second incident happened in April of the following year. I had been careful. I did not attend family events where Doyle would be present without Kent at my side, and I made sure Kent knew why. I had started consulting with an attorney, a woman named Ms. Fenwick, who worked in family law and had a directness I found steadying, about what a separation would look like financially. I wasn't ready to file, but I was ready to understand my options, which is not the same thing. What I had not accounted for was my workplace. Doyle sold commercial insurance. He had a client, a small medical group, and through that client he had connections in hospital administration. I don't know exactly who he spoke to or what he said. What I know is that in early April I was called into a meeting with my unit manager and the director of nursing, and they told me there had been an anonymous complaint filed against me. The complaint alleged that I had falsified a medication record. I had not falsified anything. I knew it and I knew how to prove it, but knowing a thing and proving a thing are not the same weight when the accusation is already in your file. I went home that night and I sat in the parking garage of my building for 40 minutes before I could get out of the car. I called Miss Fenwick first, then Dr. Bowman. Then, for the first time in a year, I called my mother in Oregon. The conversation with my mother was long and difficult, and one I should have had much earlier. She listened. She cried. She asked why I hadn't told her sooner, and I didn't have a clean answer for her. What I said was, because I thought I could fix it. She said, "You can't fix something that isn't broken in you." I wrote that down in my journal. What I had by that point was a record. 13 months of documentation. The ER report from the night of the assault, photographs of my injuries taken by the ER nurse on protocol, Dr. Bowman's clinical notes, which she was willing to provide, text messages from Kent that I had screenshotted the night before he asked me to delete the thread for reasons he never fully explained, and the journal, Ms. Arrow. Fenwick reviewed everything over the course of 2 meetings. She was not excitable. She laid it out the way you lay out a case, which is what it was. The medication complaint at the hospital was handled internally. I asked my manager for a formal investigation in writing, and I requested that the digital access logs be pulled. Every medication administration record has a timestamp and a badge scan, and mine were clean and consistent. The investigation took 11 days. The complaint was formally determined to be unfounded. That determination went into my file too, right next to the original complaint. The anonymous complainant was never officially identified, but Miss Fenwick sent a letter, carefully worded, legally precise, to Doyle's home address. I don't know what it said exactly. What she told me was that it was a letter informing him that his conduct had been documented, and that any further interference in my professional life would be met with legal action. He did not respond. He didn't need to. The interference stopped. I filed for divorce in June. Kent did not fight it the way I had expected. Maybe somewhere in him he had known this was coming, or maybe the family had decided the cleanest outcome was to let it proceed without spectacle. Either way, the process was painful, but not combative. We divided what was ours. I kept my car and my 401k, and the deposit on the apartment, which was in my name. He kept the furniture, most of which had belonged to his family anyway. My father-in-law never acknowledged what he had seen in my kitchen. Not once. Not during the proceedings, not in any communication that came through attorneys. He stood in my doorway and watched his son's wife bleeding on the floor, and he closed the door, and then he carried on being a retired circuit court judge with a charitable foundation and a family that stayed together. I think about that a lot. What it costs a person to be that kind of protected. What they have to not see in order to maintain it. The hospital promoted me to charge nurse in August. My unit manager wrote the recommendation letter herself. I didn't tell her what had been happening in my personal life. She didn't need to know, and it wasn't the point. The point was the work, and the work had always been good, even when everything around it was falling apart. Especially then. I'm 31 now. I have a different apartment. Smaller, quieter, 2 blocks from a park where I run in the mornings when my shift allows. I have a cat named Fig who doesn't do anything useful but sits on my chest when I come home from hard shifts, which turns out to be the most useful thing anyone has offered me in years. My mother flew out from Oregon in September of the year I filed. She stayed for 10 days and she helped me paint the living room a color called Morning Fog, which is blue-gray and makes the room feel like the inside of a held breath. She left a card on the kitchen counter that I found after she'd gone to the airport. It said, "You did not crack. You bent. There is a difference, and it matters." I still have that card. It's on my refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a sunflower that I bought at a farmer's market because I needed something yellow in my kitchen. I want to be careful here because this is the part where it's easy to make the ending neater than it was. The truth is, it's not fully neat. I still have moments, standing in a parking garage, sitting in a conference room, hearing a door close, when something in my body reacts before my brain can catch up. That is not something that goes away clean. Dr. Bowman says it doesn't need to. She says the goal isn't to stop remembering. It's to stop being held by the memory. I'm working on that. Doyle is still in the same city. I have occasionally seen his car. I don't know if he thinks about that night. I suspect he has constructed a version of events where I was the problem all along, because that is what people like him need in order to sleep. I don't carry that. It's too heavy and it doesn't belong to me. My father-in-law sent me a letter after the divorce was final. 2 paragraphs, typed, formal. It expressed regret that things had not worked out. It said he hoped I would find happiness. It did not mention the kitchen. It did not mention the dish towel. It did not mention the dish towel. It did not mention the door. I read it once. I did not write back. I put it through my paper shredder and stood there until the machine finished, and there was nothing left of it but thin strips of paper in a plastic bin. Then I got in my car and drove to work and clocked in 6 minutes early, and stood at the bedside of a man who had survived his 3rd cardiac event in 8 months, and I held his chart and I told him what we were going to do today to help him keep going. That is what I know how to do, keep people going. Even when the people who were supposed to keep me going stood in doorways and said nothing. Especially then. That's when it matters most.